you know, I don't see them interacting as much as the younger audience. But I have a fairly good base of those people, let's say, on my Facebook fan page. So I have a base of this audience, but I don't see them talking as much.
Right.
So are there any cues that I can look at? Well, I am looking at some other stuff like, you know, whether the traffic, you know, obviously the traffic on the website is going up, and, you know, if, you know, sales are increasing. Yeah, but then I think that those are too indirect. So.
Sure. Do you have here in India social media like listening tools where you're, you know, it's beyond just your local site or you know, your brand's site, but there's actually tools where you can monitor what's going on in the social space, and you can break that up by demographic, you can break it up by many different target segments. Is that something that's available to you here?
Yeah, we do use some of these, but I am not getting, you know, direct inputs. That's all I can say. Because, you know, well, the mentions and what's being talked about, but largely since interaction is skewed, people talking is skewed towards the younger audience.
Right.
You know, so I mean, I just want to know if this is the pattern that you observe in some other countries as well, and how do you deal with it?
I don't have data that's say that's a pattern we've observed. Certainly, Manardo or Bob may have. I think intuitively there are differences in behavior and how different groups use social media, as there are differences in behavior and how different groups use lots of media. I think that the trick is, to Manardo's earlier point, is to always start with the customer, the consumer. If they're not interacting as deeply and as frequently in social media channels as younger audiences, for example, then perhaps what we need is to look at other channels as supplement to social media, as a way to engage them and to build a better relationship with the brand.
I totally agree, and I think it's also down to what we were discussing before. In finding these communities, finding these consumers can be difficult in certain markets, but they do exist, and it's down to listening and trying to identify who those specific communities really are that interest your brand.
We have time for one more question.
One question here. Excuse me. Media fragmentation has become a part of life.
Could you speak up, please?
Can't hear you.
Media fragmentation has become a part of our life, but is media fragmentation an evil? And if it is it a necessary evil?
Did you hear the question?
No. What was the question?
Is media fragmentation an evil, and if so, a necessary evil?
Yes and no. On one side, I think that having huge audiences and the power of reaching everybody in one evening like we used to, fantastic. What a great luxury we had in the past in many countries in the world. On the other side, how fantastic it is that we can connect many micro communities and through all of them, adding one after the other, create a plan which has so much more relevance for the consumers that we're trying to engage with the brands. That's what I mean, yes and no. It can be great, it can be terrible, but both ways used together can be the perfect solution, at least today.
I would agree with Manardo. I think that, as we've all said earlier in our conversation, that you have to go where the customer is. And if the customer is participating in all these different forms of media, then you have to be there as well. What you have to do is find the right way to be there and figure out what the model is for you in terms of interacting and where you're getting the most traction, and be able to test and learn, as Manardo was saying earlier, to figure out, okay, well, where do you have permission? Where are you getting the most traction? Where can you really truly engage with your customer and clients, and then build upon that and maybe separate out some of the other areas where you're not getting the traction or you're not having the success. So it doesn't mean you have to be in every medium available to you, but find those where your customer has the most passion, the most enthusiasm, and be there in an authentic, relevant way.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say, Prashant, is that it's not a question of evil or not, in my opinion. It's a fact. It is a reality that we face every day in our business. And if we don't have teams of people who can work in partnership with other agencies and clients to deal with that, to make meaningful engagements between brands and consumers, then we're dead. So we've got to deal with it, we've got to embrace it, we've got to be excited by the changes and the opportunities that have been created. I can't think of I certainly can't imagine a more exciting time to work in our business for exactly that reason.
Okay, we'll take one over here. Do you have the mic? Oh.
I have the mic, so can I?
There it is.
We'll have a fight.
Okay. You know, we live in India, and we have a problem with connectivity, and because of connectivity, penetration of the internet is far lower. But we have our own fragmentation problems. For example, the number of TV channels on last count was 800, and the newspapers are multiplying. So is our conversations, is the tail wagging the dog, is my question. The smallest part in the advertising towards the net would be all of under 4 or 5%. And that yet takes up so much of a mind space and our thought process. So at some point, shouldn't we also be discussing what's happening with print right now and television right now? Because that's where the money's going. I'd love to have your take on that.
Well, I think we sort of answered it a minute ago, but I would say that it's really important to, as a client, to have a point of view and be able to share that where people want to be engaged in that conversation. So TV is still a very important vehicle for us, but it's not currently interactive in the way that some of the other channels have interactivity, where you can have a conversation and it's just not the brand speaking to the customer. So that still is very important to us, as well as print. And in print, we find very interesting ways to get our message across. It's no longer just the half page, quarter page, full page. In India, there's been some great examples done for Citibank with strip ads, where we're taking the space just above a big retailer and saying that you can get with your Citi card a specific percentage off on electronics. So we're trying to be very creative in the way that we interact with our customers in those other channels. But I do think those smaller spaces have more opportunity for true engagement, which hopefully will create word of mouth and beyond. So I still think that it's important.
It is. I think in truth, if you looked at any of our agencies, a great percentage of our people and the time and resources we employ for our clients are still focused very much on print media, on television. But as Manardo said, it's about sort of moving from thinking just about those in narrow silos and looking at how consumers move across platforms. I think the bulk of our media research investments go in the so-called traditional media. I think we've got to push research providers and ourselves to look at how consumers move across channels, how consumers look at video communications from traditional broadcasting platforms through to new internet-based platforms. So I don't think it's a question of one or the other. I think it's how do we balance the consumer's journey across all channels, understand that, and find the right mix of solutions for a client.
If you look at TV investments globally, across the whole of the world, in the first 2.5 quarters of this year, they've grown in dollar terms and in share. So that shows that television is growing faster than other medium. Having said that, which television are we talking about? Are we talking about digital television and new opportunities where every new set is potentially connected online? Are we talking about mobile television where, if I remember the statistics right, there are going to be 8.5 million in India by 2015? Which television are we talking about? And then we're still talking about content and platforms that help to distribute it.
Great. And one last question right there in the yellow.
Hello. I have actually two interrelated questions. I'll ask them one at a time. The first one is to do with this whole business of social media and digital marketing being a complementary one or being the core one. And my question is that with respect to the big brands, the large brands, would it be true to say that in the long term also the digital media, the digital and the social media would be a complementary media? It is unlikely to become the core media. I'd like to have your take on that.
Difficult. My perspective is it depends on what type of brand you're talking about and in what type of category. I think there are certain brands for sure, you're right, that those media channels may be complementary or amplifiers for communications in other channels. But I think there are other brands and business models for which they are the primary or sole channel for reaching customers and transacting with customers. So I think it varies by by business model.
And there is also another way to read your question. Is it more important what we say about a brand, or is it more important what the consumer says about the brand? I think everybody would agree that at the end, it's more important what the consumer says.
Which way is the consumer likely to say in the long term?
Okay.
Yeah. The second question was, again, this is with respect to the large brands. Would it be true to say, and I'm making a provocative statement for you to react to it, that most of the large brands, I'm talking about FMCG and brick and mortar brands, they've been a little bit slow in getting onto the digital bandwagon. Now, I know these are early years and people will take time and it's still the shiny object, etc. But would you agree that the pace of adoption is perhaps a little bit slower than what we would have normally expected? And if there are any thoughts on what could be blocking it?
I don't actually. I think that major brands have been very wise, have done their tests, have learned their lessons, and step after step, they got where they needed to be at the right time. I don't think they've wasted time. Unless you're talking about some very specific exceptions. I think they behave like big brands. They haven't jumped on the bandwagon on day one. They've done their exercise, they followed the process, and they got there at the right time. And if you look at the last 2-3 years, investments in so-called digital, I hate the word digital because I think that everything's digital, but have multiplied at a pace that could have been not imaginable 2-3 years ago. I don't know if you...
No, I agree.
No, I agree also.
I'm very sorry, but I'm going to need to interrupt. Obviously, it's a very interesting, exciting session, but I'm going to have to interrupt you all, if that's okay, because we're running behind schedule.
Okay.
But thank you so much. That obviously was very exciting and interactive. To you, gentlemen. If I could please request you to be on stage for a moment, I'd like to invite Mr. Jwalan Swaroop, COO Lokmat Media Limited, to please come on stage and hand over a token of appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, before you leave for a break, there's an announcement I'd like to make, so if you could please hang on for a minute. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. I'm sure you've all got your passports, but along with that, you must have got an agenda. Now, thank you.